There's a quiet kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from being pulled in too many directions that never truly mattered. You start to notice it in the small moments. Explaining yourself when you didn't need to. Reacting when silence would have kept your ground. Giving attention to things that never deserved your focus. And over time, something shifts. You realize most people aren't stuck because they lack ability. They're stuck because their attention is scattered. Chasing approval, responding to noise, trying to be seen instead of becoming something solid within themselves. But there's another way, a quieter one. It doesn't ask you to perform. It asks you to withdraw your attention from what is not yours to control and place it where it belongs. On your judgment, on your discipline, on the work no one sees. Because the strongest form of progress is not announced. It is built in silence. There is a kind of fatigue that does not come from labor. It comes from exposure, from too many voices entering your mind before you have even had the chance to hear your own. From too many opinions, too many reactions, too many small demands placed on your attention until the day no longer feels like yours. And if you have lived this way for long enough, you begin to mistake this condition for normal. You call it being busy. You call it staying informed. You call it keeping up. But deep down, something in you knows the truth. You are not tired because life is asking too much of you. You are tired because you have been standing open to things that were never worthy of entry. Most people do not notice the moment this begins. It does not arrive dramatically. It enters quietly. A glance at the phone before your thoughts have settled. A need to reply when silence would have been stronger. A habit of explaining yourself to people who were never trying to understand you in the first place. Little by little, your attention stops belonging to you. And once your attention is no longer yours, neither is your peace. This is how inner erosion happens. Not through one great failure, not through one public humiliation, not even through one betrayal, though many people know what it is to be changed by that too. It happens through repetition, through the steady surrender of your inner ground, through days spent reacting instead of choosing, through conversations that leave you smaller, through the quiet pressure to remain visible, agreeable, available, understandable, impressive. The world does not always break a person by force. More often, it breaks him through fragmentation. And that fragmentation is difficult to detect at first because from the outside life can still appear intact. You still go to work, you still answer messages, you still make plans. You still carry yourself in a way that looks functional, but beneath that surface your center begins to loosen, your thoughts lose precision, your emotions become easier to provoke. Your standards become easier to negotiate. You find yourself speaking when you should be observing, defending when you should be withholding judgment, reaching outward when the real work is waiting inward. This is the contradiction many people live inside. They want clarity, but they do not protect stillness. They want strength, but they do not practice restraint. They want peace, but they keep feeding the very things that disturb it. And because the disturbance does not always look dramatic, they underestimate it. But the Stoics understood something severe and liberating at once. A mind does not become disordered only by tragedy. It becomes disordered by habit, by repeated consent to what weakens it. That is why the problem is deeper than distraction. Distraction is only the surface expression. Beneath it is something older. A need to be seen, a fear of being overlooked, a discomfort with solitude, a subtle dependence on reaction from others in order to feel located in yourself. And once a person begins to live from that place, silence feels threatening. Not because silence is empty, but because silence removes the audience. It removes the noise that kept him from seeing his own condition clearly. So he avoids it. He scrolls a little longer. He fills the room with sound. He keeps one more conversation going. He checks one more thing that did not need checking. He tells himself he is relaxing, unwinding, staying connected, but often he is doing something else entirely. He is postponing contact with himself. He is keeping the deeper inventory from taking place. Because once the room becomes quiet, he may have to face what has been neglected: his own judgment, his own inconsistency, his own exhaustion, his own dependence on being noticed. And none of this is said with cruelty. It is simply truth. Many people are not weak in any obvious sense. They are capable, intelligent, even disciplined in fragments. But they are divided. Their attention is divided. Their motives are divided. Their emotions are too easily recruited by things beneath them. So they move through life with a strange mixture of effort and drift. They are always in motion, rarely in command. You can see it in small moments. A man sits down to do serious work, but 10 minutes later, he is answering something unnecessary, because the pull of interruption feels stronger than the discipline of remaining. Someone receives a mild criticism and thinks about it for hours, not because the criticism was profound, but because his inner position is still too dependent on how he is perceived. Someone makes a quiet promise to himself in the morning, then abandons it by afternoon because the mood changed and no one was there to witness the cost. These moments seem minor. They are not. A life is shaped in exactly these moments, not in the declarations, not in the image, not in the things said for effect. A life is shaped in the private direction of attention, in what you permit to enter, in what you refuse to chase, in whether you remain with what matters long enough for it to begin changing you. Marcus Aurelius returned to this again and again in his own writing, not as performance, but as necessity. Guard the ruling center. Return to yourself. Do not be jerked around by every impression. He understood that the greatest danger was not merely hardship, but inner surrender. To let the outer world dictate the movements of the inner one. To become a creature of provocation rather than a man governed by reason. And that is where this journey must begin. Not with louder ambition. Not with another performance of self-improvement. Not with the desire to appear disciplined, but with a more uncomfortable question. What has your attention been serving? What has your silence been replaced with? What have you been avoiding by remaining constantly engaged with what is outward, immediate, and loud? Because if your life feels scattered, it is not always because you lack strength. Sometimes it is because your strength has been leaking through too many open doors. And the first act of rebuilding is not intensity, it is closure. Closing the door to what does not deserve your mind. Closing the door to constant reaction. Closing the door to needless explanation. Closing the door to the old habit of reaching outward for confirmation before you have consulted your own judgment. This is not withdrawal from life. It is the beginning of right relation to it. Because the person who cannot be alone with his own mind will be owned by whatever enters it next. But the person who learns to return inward to become still long enough to see clearly begins to recover something rare in this age. Not image, not applause, not the appearance of control, actual control. And once that recovery begins, the world may still be noisy, but it will no longer have immediate access to you. That is where strength starts, quietly, inwardly, before anyone sees it. The moment you begin to withdraw from that constant exposure, something unexpected happens. It is not immediate clarity. It is not calm. It is not relief. What comes first is friction. a kind of internal noise that was always there but was drowned out by everything you kept yourself busy with. And now, without the usual distractions, it begins to surface. Thoughts that feel unfinished, doubts that never fully resolved, questions you avoided answering because they required more honesty than you were ready to give. This is where most people turn back, not because silence failed them, but because silence revealed too much, too quickly. There is a misconception that stillness is peaceful by default. It is not. Stillness is revealing. It does not create disorder, it exposes it. And if a person has been living outward for long enough, that exposure can feel like discomfort, even pressure. The mind begins to wander, not with clarity, but with scattered impressions. Old conversations replay themselves. Small regrets take on more weight than they should. You begin to notice patterns in your own behavior that you were too occupied to see before. And this is the point where discipline becomes necessary, not in action, but in observation. Because the instinct is to escape it again, to return to the noise, to the scrolling, to the unnecessary engagement that feels easier than sitting with unresolved thought. But if you leave now, you remain unchanged. You return to the same cycle, only with a slightly deeper layer of avoidance beneath it. The Stoics were not interested in comfort. They were interested in truth. And truth, when encountered without distraction, has a way of stripping away illusion with a precision that feels uncomfortable at first. But that discomfort is not harm. It is alignment beginning. When you remain in that silence long enough, something begins to reorganize. Not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself, but gradually. The thoughts that once appeared chaotic start to settle into patterns. You begin to see that many of your reactions were not responses to reality, but responses to interpretation. You begin to notice how often you gave weight to things that had no authority over your judgment, how often you allowed external noise to override internal reasoning. And slowly, a separation begins to form. Not from life, but from confusion. This is where awareness sharpens. Not the kind that observes everything around you, but the kind that observes how you are engaging with what is around you. You start to catch yourself in the moment, before the reply is sent, before the argument begins, before the impulse takes over. There is a brief pause, and within that pause, there is a choice. It is subtle, but it is decisive. The choice to proceed as before or to remain still and assess. And in that assessment, you begin to reclaim something that had been scattered across too many directions. Your attention returns to you, and with it your sense of proportion begins to correct itself. Things that once felt urgent lose their urgency. Things that once felt personal begin to reveal themselves as trivial. You stop assigning meaning where there is none. You stop defending positions that were never challenged in a meaningful way. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never seeking clarity, only reaction. And as this happens, something else begins to take shape. A quieter form of confidence. Not the kind that needs to assert itself, but the kind that no longer needs to respond to everything. This is what makes silence powerful, but not in the way it is often misunderstood. It is not about withholding speech for the sake of appearing composed. It is about refining your judgment so that speech becomes deliberate, not habitual. It is about removing the compulsion to fill every space with noise and replacing it with the ability to remain steady when nothing is being said. That steadiness is not emptiness. It is control, the kind of control that does not need to be demonstrated because it is already present. There is a noticeable shift that occurs when a person reaches this point. Their presence changes, not because they are trying to project something, but because they are no longer divided. Their attention is not being pulled in every direction. Their reactions are not being triggered by every minor stimulus. They move with a kind of internal order that becomes visible without effort. And this is often misinterpreted by others as distance or detachment in a negative sense. But it is neither. It is simply a person who has stopped offering himself to everything that asks for him. And that can be unsettling to those who are still living in constant reaction. Because silence, when it is grounded in clarity, has a way of exposing noise in others. It reflects it back without engaging with it. It does not argue. It does not compete. It simply remains unmoved. And in a world that is used to immediate response, that lack of reaction is often misunderstood. But it is not indifference. It is discipline. You begin to understand that not everything deserves your involvement. Not every thought deserves your belief. Not every feeling deserves your expression. Not every situation requires your presence. And this understanding does not come from theory. It comes from sitting with yourself long enough to see how much of your previous engagement was unnecessary. How much of it was driven by habit, by impulse, by the need to feel active rather than the need to be correct. This is where restraint becomes a form of strength. Not the kind that resists outward force, but the kind that governs inward movement. The ability to hold your ground internally even when the environment is unstable. The ability to delay reaction until judgment is clear. The ability to remain composed when the easier option would be to engage, to respond, to prove something that no longer needs proving. And each time you choose that restraint, you reinforce a different pattern, one that is not dependent on external confirmation. Over time, that pattern becomes identity, not because you declared it, but because you practiced it, quietly, repeatedly, without needing acknowledgement. And this is where most people misunderstand growth. They look for visible markers, for moments of recognition, for confirmation that something has changed. But real change does not announce itself. It accumulates. It builds in the absence of attention. It strengthens in the absence of validation. And by the time it becomes visible, it is already established. You are no longer trying to become composed. You are composed. You are no longer trying to appear focused. You are focused. You are no longer trying to control your reactions. You are not being provoked in the same way anymore. And this is not because the world has changed. It is because your relationship to it has. You are no longer entering every situation with the same openness. You are no longer allowing every impression to take hold. You have developed a filter. Not one that isolates you, but one that protects what matters. Your attention, your clarity, your judgment. This is the beginning of self-command, and it does not arrive all at once. It builds through these small decisions. To remain silent when speech is unnecessary, to observe when reaction is expected, to withdraw when engagement would cost more than it gives. And with each of these decisions, you are not losing anything of value. You are removing what was never serving you in the first place. The noise begins to fade, not because it has disappeared, but because it no longer has access. And in that quiet, something steadier begins to take its place. A mind that is no longer crowded, a presence that is no longer reactive, a direction that is no longer dependent on what is happening around you. This is where the real work begins. What becomes clear at this stage is that silence is not something you adopt as a surface behavior. It is something that emerges as a consequence of understanding. When you begin to see how much of your previous speech was unnecessary, how much of your reaction was automatic, how much of your attention was given without intention, you do not force yourself into silence. You arrive there naturally, not as withdrawal, but as correction. You begin to recognize that speaking less is not about saying less, but about saying only what remains after everything unnecessary has been removed. This is where many people misunderstand restraint. They assume it is suppression. They believe that to be silent is to hold something back, to deny expression, to diminish presence. But that is not what is happening here. What is happening is refinement. You are no longer compelled to respond to everything because you no longer see everything as requiring response. Your judgment has changed. And when judgment changes, behavior follows without strain. You start to notice how often people speak not to communicate, but to fill space. Not to clarify, but to assert. Not to understand, but to be seen. And once you see it, it becomes difficult to participate in it the same way. Not out of superiority, but out of awareness. You recognize the cost. Every unnecessary word pulls your attention outward. Every reaction invites more reaction. Every explanation creates another opening for misunderstanding. And slowly you begin to value precision over presence, clarity over volume. There is a quiet strength in this shift that does not need to be explained. You feel it in yourself before anyone else notices it. A kind of internal steadiness that was not there before. You are less hurried, less compelled, less available to things that once pulled you in without resistance. And this steadiness changes how you move through situations that would have unsettled you before. A conversation that once would have drawn you into argument now passes without disturbance. A comment that once would have lingered in your mind now dissolves quickly because it does not meet your standards for attention. A moment that once would have triggered a reaction now becomes an observation, and in that observation you maintain your position. This is what Epictetus meant when he emphasized control over judgment rather than control over events. The event does not need to change for your experience of it to change. What changes is your interpretation. And silence plays a role in that, because it creates the space necessary for interpretation to be examined before it becomes reaction. Without that space, everything is immediate. The stimulus arrives and the response follows without interruption. But with that space, even if it is brief, there is a separation. You see the thought before you act on it. You question the impulse before you follow it. You allow reason to intervene where habit once dominated. And this is where self-command begins to take form in a way that is both subtle and absolute. You are no longer living at the mercy of what appears. You are assessing it. And that assessment is not passive. It is active. It requires attention. It requires discipline. It requires the willingness to delay gratification, to resist the urge to respond quickly, to tolerate the discomfort of not immediately expressing what arises. But in that delay, you gain something far more valuable than the temporary relief of reaction. You gain clarity. Clarity about what matters and what does not. Clarity about what deserves your engagement and what should be left untouched. Clarity about the difference between impulse and intention. And once that clarity becomes consistent, your actions begin to align with it in a way that no longer feels forced. You are not holding yourself back. You are moving forward with less interference. This is where silence becomes strategy. Not in the sense of manipulation, not as a tactic to influence others, but as a method of preserving your own internal order. You begin to understand that your attention is finite, that your energy is limited, and that every unnecessary engagement depletes both. And with that understanding, you become more selective. You do not answer everything. You do not react to everything. You do not involve yourself in everything. And this selectivity is not avoidance. It is discipline. It is the recognition that not every situation is yours to enter. Not every opinion is yours to challenge. Not every conflict is yours to resolve. You begin to operate from a place of self-respect rather than obligation. This is often where friction with others begins to appear. Because when you stop responding in familiar ways, people notice. They may not understand it, but they feel it. The absence of your reaction disrupts the pattern they were used to. The silence they once filled with your engagement is no longer available. And sometimes this creates tension, not because you have done something wrong, but because you have stopped participating in something that was never necessary. It is important to understand this clearly. Not everyone will interpret your silence as strength. Some will interpret it as distance. Some will interpret it as indifference. Some will interpret it as resistance, but their interpretation does not define your position. What matters is whether your silence is grounded in clarity or avoidance. If it is grounded in clarity, it does not require defense. It does not require explanation. It stands on its own. This is where Marcus Aurelius's instruction becomes practical rather than theoretical. Do not waste time explaining what a good person should be. Be one. Not through declaration, but through action. Not through argument, but through consistency. Not through visibility, but through alignment between judgment and behavior. And alignment is something that cannot be faked for long. It is built in private. It is reinforced in repetition. It is tested in situations where the easier option would be to revert to old habits. You will find that the real challenge is not maintaining silence when it is easy, but maintaining it when it is difficult, when you are misunderstood, when you are provoked, when there is an opportunity to prove something and you choose not to take it. These are the moments that define whether your silence is surface or substance, because anyone can remain quiet when there is nothing at stake. But remaining composed when there is pressure, when there is tension, when there is a pull to react, that is where discipline reveals itself. And each time you pass through that moment without losing your position, you strengthen something that does not rely on circumstance. You begin to trust yourself in a way that does not require external confirmation. You know that you can hold your ground. You know that you can choose your response. You know that you are not controlled by what appears in front of you. This is where confidence begins to change its nature. It is no longer about how you are perceived. It is no longer about how you present yourself. It is no longer about whether others recognize your strength. It becomes internal, a quiet certainty that does not fluctuate with opinion. A stability that does not depend on outcome, a sense of direction that is not influenced by noise, and because it is internal, it does not need to be displayed. It is present in how you move, how you decide, how you respond, and how you choose not to respond. This is the kind of strength that does not attract attention through force, but through absence. The absence of unnecessary reaction. The absence of scattered attention, the absence of dependency on being seen, and in that absence, something else becomes visible. Presence, not the kind that fills a room with noise, but the kind that remains steady regardless of what is happening around it. And this presence is not created through effort. It is the result of removing what was interfering with it. What remains is simple: clarity, restraint, direction, and the understanding that you do not need to participate in everything in order to be complete. This is the foundation that everything else will be built on. Because once you have this, the next question is no longer how to appear strong. It becomes how to live in a way that reinforces that strength every day. Once that foundation begins to settle, you start to see something that was always there, but rarely examined with precision. Your attention has been treated as if it were unlimited, as if it could be spent without consequence. But the truth is far less forgiving. Every moment of attention is a form of currency. And like any currency, once it is spent, it does not return. What most people overlook is not the presence of distraction, but the cost of it. Not in a dramatic sense, but in accumulation. Small fragments of attention given away without intention, repeated over days, then weeks, then years, until something essential begins to weaken. You begin to notice how this happens in ordinary situations. A message that interrupts your focus and lingers longer than it should. A comment that pulls your mind into a silent argument that continues long after the moment has passed. A piece of information that adds nothing of value yet occupies space that could have been used for something deliberate. None of these moments feel significant on their own, but together they create a pattern of interruption, a pattern of fragmentation, a pattern of losing direction not through failure but through diffusion. And diffusion is difficult to detect because it does not feel like loss. It feels like activity. You are still doing things, still responding, still moving. But the movement lacks cohesion. The effort lacks depth. You find yourself starting many things and completing fewer. You feel occupied but not grounded. And when you try to focus, you realize that your mind does not hold steady as it once did. It shifts quickly. It seeks novelty. It resists stillness. And this is not accidental. It is the result of repeated exposure to scattered input. The Stoics would have recognized this as a failure of discipline, not in the sense of moral judgment, but in the sense of misalignment. Your attention has not been directed according to reason. It has been pulled according to impulse. And once impulse becomes the guide, direction is lost. This is where the importance of guarding attention becomes clear, not as a rigid rule, but as a necessity. You begin to see that what you allow into your mind has a direct influence on how your mind operates. Not just in content, but in structure. If your attention is constantly interrupted, your thinking becomes fragmented. If your attention is constantly pulled toward trivial matters, your judgment begins to prioritize what is trivial. And over time, this reshapes not only what you think about, but how you think. This is why silence is not simply the absence of sound. It is the absence of interference. It is the condition in which your mind can return to its natural function, to observe, to assess, to decide. Without that condition, even a capable mind begins to operate below its capacity. It reacts more than it reasons. It absorbs more than it filters. It moves more than it considers. And slowly, without noticing it, becomes dependent on external input to maintain activity. This is one of the more subtle forms of weakness. Not the inability to act, but the inability to remain still. Because stillness requires independence. It requires that your mind is not reliant on constant stimulation to feel engaged. It requires that you can sit with a single thought long enough to understand it fully. And if that ability has been weakened, the first experience of silence will feel uncomfortable, not because silence is unnatural, but because your mind has been trained away from it. This is where the work becomes deliberate. You begin to reduce unnecessary input, not as an act of rejection, but as an act of selection. You become more aware of what you allow to occupy your attention. You begin to ask whether something deserves entry before you give it space. And in doing so, you are not limiting yourself. You are protecting what allows you to function at your best. There is a noticeable resistance that appears here, a subtle pull to return to the old pattern. To check, to respond, to engage, to fill the silence with something that feels easier than holding it. And this resistance is not random. It is the echo of previous habits, patterns that have been reinforced through repetition, and breaking them requires more than intention. it requires consistency. You will find that the urge to interrupt yourself appears at predictable moments. When a task becomes difficult, when a thought becomes uncomfortable, when progress slows. In those moments, the mind looks for escape. Something lighter, something quicker, something that requires less effort than staying with what is in front of you. And this is where discipline must intervene, not forcefully but firmly. You remain. You continue. You resist the urge to abandon the moment for something easier. This is where focus is built. Not in ideal conditions, but in resistance. Not when it feels natural, but when it feels difficult. Each time you stay with what matters, despite the pull to leave, you strengthen something that is not immediately visible. Your capacity to direct attention, your ability to maintain position, your willingness to endure discomfort without seeking immediate relief. And over time, this begins to change how your mind responds to challenge. What once felt difficult begins to feel manageable. What once required effort begins to feel normal. What once caused distraction begins to pass without effect. And this shift is not the result of motivation. It is the result of repetition. You are training your mind to remain with what you choose rather than follow what appears. This is where a different kind of confidence begins to form. Not based on outcome, but based on reliability. You know that when you sit down to do something, you will remain with it. You know that when distraction appears, you will not follow it. You know that your attention is no longer easily redirected. And because of that, your actions begin to carry more weight. They are no longer scattered across multiple directions. They are concentrated, deliberate, aligned. This alignment creates momentum, not the kind that is visible immediately, but the kind that accumulates beneath the surface. You begin to make progress in ways that are not obvious at first. You complete what you start. You follow through on what you decide. You build a rhythm that does not depend on how you feel in the moment. And that rhythm becomes structure. Structure that supports you when motivation is absent. Structure that keeps you moving when the environment is unstable. Structure that removes the need to decide repeatedly because the direction has already been established. This is where many people begin to see the difference between effort and discipline. Effort is temporary. It rises and falls with circumstance. Discipline is consistent. It remains regardless of circumstance. And silence supports discipline because it removes the variables that interfere with it. It creates an environment where your actions are guided by intention rather than interruption, where your decisions are based on clarity rather than impulse, where your time is spent on what you choose, not on what appears. As this continues, you begin to notice a change in how you experience time itself. It no longer feels fragmented. It feels continuous. You move from one action to the next without losing your position in between. There is less starting and stopping, less shifting, less reorienting. And because of that, your capacity increases. Not because you are doing more, but because you are doing what matters without interruption. This is the quiet advantage of focused attention. It does not announce itself. It does not seek recognition, but it changes everything beneath the surface. And once you experience it, returning to the old pattern becomes difficult. Not because it is unavailable, but because you can now see its cost clearly. You understand what it takes from you. You understand what it prevents you from becoming. And with that understanding, the decision becomes easier. You protect your attention. You reduce unnecessary engagement. You remain with what matters, not as an act of isolation, but as an act of alignment. Because now you are no longer asking how to keep up with everything around you. you're asking something more precise. What deserves my attention and what does not? And that question begins to shape everything that follows. As your attention becomes more deliberate, something else begins to surface beneath it. A quieter layer of awareness that was always present but rarely given the space to operate. It is not loud. It does not compete. It does not demand. But when it is allowed to come forward, it begins to guide your decisions with a kind of clarity that does not depend on external input. This is the part of you that evaluates before acting, that questions before agreeing, that observes before reacting. And once it begins to take its place again, you realize how often it was previously overridden. The shift is not dramatic, it is precise. You begin to notice the difference between what you feel and what is true, the difference between what appears urgent and what actually matters, the difference between a reaction that feels justified in the moment and a response that remains aligned with your standards afterward. And this distinction becomes the center of your discipline, not controlling everything you feel, but choosing what you act on. Because feeling is immediate. Judgment is deliberate, and without that separation, your actions are governed by whatever arrives first. This is where restraint becomes more than an idea. It becomes practice. You start to hold the space between stimulus and response with more consistency, not perfectly, but intentionally. A message comes in that would have once shifted your attention immediately. Now you see it, and you choose when to engage. A comment is made that carries a subtle edge. You notice the impulse to respond, but you do not follow it blindly. You assess. You decide whether it deserves your energy, and often the answer is no. This is not passivity. It is precision. You are no longer treating every input as equal. You are filtering. And in that filtering, you begin to conserve something that was previously being spent without awareness. Your mental clarity, your emotional stability, your capacity to remain steady. There is a particular moment that becomes more visible as this develops, the moment when you are about to act out of habit. It is small, almost unnoticeable if you are not paying attention, but it is there, a slight tension, a pull to move quickly, to respond, to fill the space. And now, instead of moving with it, you pause, not for long, but long enough to interrupt the pattern. And in that interruption, you reclaim choice. This is where discipline deepens, not in the actions themselves, but in the awareness that precedes them. Because once you can see the pattern, you are no longer inside it. You are observing it. And once you are observing it, you can change it. You begin to see how often your previous behavior was driven by repetition rather than reasoning. How many of your responses were automatic. How many of your decisions were made without full consideration. And with that realization, you start to rebuild your approach. Not by forcing change, but by removing what is unnecessary and reinforcing what is aligned. This is where simplicity becomes strength. You reduce the number of things you engage with. You reduce the number of decisions you make impulsively. You reduce the amount of time you spend in situations that do not contribute to your direction. And by reducing, you do not lose. You gain. Clarity becomes easier to maintain. Focus becomes easier to sustain. Energy becomes easier to direct. And as these begin to stabilize, your actions take on a different quality. They are no longer scattered. They are intentional. You are not doing more. You are doing what matters with less interference. There is a noticeable shift in how you handle difficulty as well. Before, when something became uncomfortable, there was a tendency to move away from it, to distract, to postpone, to replace it with something easier. Now that pattern is less dominant. You remain longer. You allow the discomfort to exist without immediately trying to remove it. And in doing so, you begin to understand something that was previously avoided. Discomfort is not an instruction to stop. It is often a signal that something requires more attention, not less. This changes how you approach your work, your decisions, your interactions. You stop looking for immediate relief. You start looking for alignment. And alignment is not always comfortable in the moment, but it is stable over time. This is where the Stoic perspective becomes practical. You begin to see that control is not about eliminating difficulty. It is about choosing how you meet it. Not with reaction, but with steadiness. Not with avoidance, but with presence. Not with impulsive movement, but with deliberate action. And as you continue to apply this, something else begins to form beneath the surface. Trust. Not in the external sense, not in circumstances, not in outcomes, but in yourself. You begin to trust that you can hold your position, that you can remain with what matters, that you can make decisions that are consistent with your standards even when no one is there to observe or reinforce them. This trust is not built through declaration, it is built through evidence. Each time you follow through, each time you resist distraction, each time you choose alignment over impulse, you reinforce that trust, and over time it becomes stable. You no longer need to question whether you will act according to your values. You know you will, because you have done it repeatedly. And this changes how you carry yourself. There is less internal negotiation, less hesitation, less second-guessing. You move with more certainty, not because you are sure of every outcome, but because you are sure of your approach. And that certainty is quiet. It does not seek validation. It does not require acknowledgement. It is present in how you decide, how you act, how you remain when things do not go as expected. This is where emotional control begins to take a different form. It is no longer about suppressing what you feel. It is about not being directed by it. You allow the feeling to exist, but you do not let it determine your action. You observe it, but you do not become it. And in that separation, you maintain your position. This is not easy. It requires consistency. It requires attention. It requires the willingness to remain present even when it would be easier to disengage. But with each repetition, it becomes more natural, not automatic, but familiar. You begin to recognize the patterns earlier. You begin to intervene sooner. You begin to operate from a place that is less reactive and more deliberate. And this is where your sense of self begins to change. Not in appearance, not in how others perceive you, but in how you relate to your own actions. You are no longer trying to become someone different. You are becoming consistent with what you already know to be right. And that consistency is what builds strength, not in isolated moments, but in accumulation, day after day, decision after decision, action after action, without announcement, without display, without the need to be seen. And as this continues, something becomes clear. You do not need to prove your discipline. You need to live it quietly, consistently, without interruption. Because the more you do, the less there is to say. And the less you say, the more solid your position becomes. This is where restraint stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like structure. A structure that supports everything that comes next. Once that structure begins to take hold, it does not remain confined to quiet moments of reflection. It follows you into the ordinary situations where your discipline is no longer theoretical. It shows up in places that seem too small to matter, yet define everything. The way you respond when interrupted. The way you carry yourself when ignored. The way you continue when no one is watching. This is where the difference between intention and practice becomes clear. Because it is easy to feel aligned when you are alone, when the environment is controlled, when nothing is pulling against you. But real discipline reveals itself when that control disappears. When someone speaks to you with less respect than you expected, when a plan does not unfold as you intended, when your effort is not recognized or worse, misunderstood. These are the moments where most people return to habit. They react, they explain, they defend, they seek to restore balance through immediate action. And in doing so, they lose the very ground they had been building. You begin to see these moments differently, not as interruptions, but as tests. Not tests imposed by others, but tests of your own consistency. Because what matters is not how you behave when things are easy, but how you maintain your position when something attempts to pull you out of it. And this is where silence becomes more difficult, but also more meaningful. It is no longer about withholding unnecessary speech. It is about maintaining clarity when there is pressure to abandon it. You may find yourself in a conversation where the other person is trying to provoke a reaction, not directly, but subtly. A comment that questions your direction, a remark that carries an edge of dismissal. In the past, this would have triggered a response. You would have explained your reasoning, defended your position, tried to correct their perception. But now there is a pause. You see the attempt. You recognize the pull. And instead of engaging, you choose not to enter, not because you lack an answer, but because the situation does not deserve one. This is a different kind of strength. It does not seek resolution in every moment. It does not need to be understood immediately. It is willing to let things remain as they are without forcing them into clarity for the sake of comfort. And this is often where others feel unsettled, because they are used to reaction, they are used to engagement, they are used to a certain rhythm of interaction that reinforces their expectations. And when that rhythm is broken, when you no longer respond in the same way, it creates a space they are not accustomed to. But that space is not your responsibility to fill. You begin to understand that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected, not every assumption needs to be challenged, not every opinion needs to be addressed. And in choosing not to engage, you are not losing control of the situation. You are maintaining control of yourself. This distinction is important because many people believe that control means influencing others, shaping outcomes, directing the flow of interaction. But that form of control is unstable. It depends on variables that are not yours to command. The Stoic view is simpler but more demanding. Control what is yours, your judgment, your response, your action. And in situations where nothing external can be controlled, this becomes your only stable position. You will also encounter moments where the challenge is not external but internal. A task that requires sustained effort when your motivation is low. A decision that requires discipline when your mood suggests otherwise. A commitment that must be honored even when there is no immediate reward. These are the moments where many people abandon structure. They wait for a better time, a better feeling, a more favorable condition. But what they are really doing is postponing alignment. You begin to approach these moments differently. You do not ask whether you feel ready. You ask whether the action is necessary. And if it is, you proceed. Not with intensity, but with consistency. This is where discipline becomes independent of mood. You wake up at the time you decided, not because you feel like it, but because it is part of your structure. You complete the work you set for yourself, not because it is enjoyable in that moment, but because it is aligned with your direction. You follow through on what you committed to, not because it brings immediate satisfaction, but because it reinforces who you are becoming. And each time you do this, you reduce the influence of temporary states. Your actions become less dependent on how you feel and more dependent on what you have chosen. This is a subtle shift, but it changes everything. Because once your behavior is no longer governed by fluctuation, it becomes stable, and stability creates progress. Not in bursts, not in moments of inspiration, but in continuity. You begin to see how much of your previous inconsistency was tied to your willingness to negotiate with yourself, to delay, to adjust, to make exceptions. And now those negotiations become less frequent, not because you are rigid, but because you are clear. You know what matters, you know what is required, and you no longer seek to avoid it through compromise. This does not make the process easy. There will be days where the resistance is stronger, where the effort feels heavier, where the desire to return to easier patterns becomes more noticeable. But the difference now is that you recognize it, you see the pattern forming, and instead of following it, you interrupt it. You return to your structure, you continue, even if the pace is slower, even if the result is not immediate, because you understand that what you are building is not dependent on one day, it is dependent on continuity. This is where patience becomes part of discipline. Not passive waiting, but sustained effort without immediate reward. You are no longer looking for confirmation that you are on the right path. You are following it regardless. And this removes a layer of pressure that many people carry. The need to see results quickly, the need to validate effort through visible change, the need to confirm that what they are doing is working. You begin to release that need, not because results do not matter, but because you understand that they follow structure, not the other way around. And as this continues, something becomes more apparent. Your sense of self is no longer tied to what happens around you. It is tied to what you do consistently. You begin to measure yourself differently, not by recognition, not by outcome, but by alignment. Did you act according to your standards? Did you maintain your position? Did you follow through on what you decided? These become the measures that matter, and because they are within your control, they provide a stability that external measures cannot. This is where resilience begins to change its nature. It is no longer about enduring large disruptions. It is about maintaining consistency through small ones. Because it is the small disruptions that occur daily, the interruptions, the delays, the minor frustrations, the moments that test your patience. And if you can move through these without losing your position, the larger challenges become less destabilizing. You are not reacting to each moment as if it defines you. You are moving through each moment as part of a larger structure, and that structure holds, even when things do not go as expected, even when others do not respond as you would prefer, even when the environment shifts. You remain. This is where discipline becomes visible, not in what you say, not in what you present, but in how you continue, without announcement, without adjustment, without the need to be seen. And as this continues, you begin to understand something that was not clear before. Strength is not built in isolation from difficulty. It is built through it, quietly, repeatedly, without interruption. And each time you pass through these moments without losing your position, you reinforce something that cannot be taken from you. A steadiness that does not depend on circumstance. A direction that does not shift with pressure, a way of moving that is not easily disturbed. This is what you carry forward, not as an idea, but as a practice, one that will be tested again and again, and each time you will have the same choice, to react or to remain. There is another habit that reveals itself once your actions begin to stabilize, and it is quieter than distraction, but just as costly. The need to announce what you are about to do before you have done it. It often feels harmless, even productive. You share an intention, you state a goal, you describe what you are building. And for a moment, it feels like movement, like progress has already begun. But if you observe closely, something subtle is taking place beneath that feeling. The declaration itself creates a sense of completion. Not fully, not consciously, but enough to shift your urgency. Enough to reduce the pressure that would have otherwise driven you into action. And over time, this pattern begins to replace execution with expression. You talk about what you are becoming more than you become it. You describe your direction more than you follow it. And because others respond to what you say, even in small ways, it reinforces the illusion that something real has been established. This is where discipline becomes compromised without being obvious. Because nothing seems wrong on the surface. You are still thinking about your goals, still aware of what you want, still capable of acting. But the energy that should be directed into action is being released prematurely through words. And once it is released, what remains is weaker, less focused, more negotiable. You begin to see how often this has happened. A decision to improve your routine shared before the routine is built. A plan to create something spoken about before the work begins. A commitment expressed publicly before it has been tested privately. And each time the same pattern follows. A brief surge of satisfaction followed by a gradual decline in consistency. Not because you lack discipline, but because the structure was never given the chance to form without interference. This is why silence becomes necessary at a deeper level, not just in how you respond to the world, but in how you relate to your own intentions. You begin to hold them more carefully. You stop offering them outward before they have taken shape inward. You allow them to develop without exposure, not out of secrecy, but out of respect for the process. Because you understand now that the beginning is fragile. It requires protection. It requires repetition without interruption. It requires effort that is not diluted by the need to be seen. And when you give it that space, something different begins to happen. Your actions carry more weight, not because they are larger, but because they are uninterrupted. You are not dividing your attention between doing and describing. You are doing fully, consistently, without the added layer of external validation. There is a noticeable difference in how this feels. It is quieter, less dramatic, but more stable. You are no longer relying on the reaction of others to maintain your direction. You are relying on your own consistency, and that consistency becomes its own form of reinforcement. Each completed action strengthens the next. Each followed through commitment builds the next level of trust. And because this process is internal, it does not fluctuate with external response. There is also a shift in how you experience progress. Before, progress may have been tied to visible milestones, to recognition, to confirmation that what you were doing was being noticed. Now, progress is measured differently, in continuity, in adherence to structure, in the absence of deviation. You begin to value the days where nothing remarkable happens outwardly, but everything is maintained inwardly, because those are the days where identity is built. Not in moments of intensity, but in moments of consistency. This is where many people struggle. They look for signs that something is working. They look for changes that can be seen, measured, acknowledged. And when those signs do not appear quickly, they begin to question the process. They adjust. They reconsider. They seek alternative paths that promise faster results. But what they are really doing is stepping out of the structure before it has had time to establish itself. You begin to approach this differently. You understand that the absence of immediate result does not mean the absence of progress. You understand that repetition, even when it feels uneventful, is shaping something that cannot be rushed. And because of that, you remain. You continue, without needing confirmation at each step. This is where patience becomes integrated into discipline, not as waiting, but as sustained action without interruption. You are no longer looking for evidence to justify your effort. Your effort is the evidence. And this changes how you handle uncertainty. You do not abandon direction when results are delayed. You maintain it. You trust the process not because it is guaranteed, but because it is aligned, and alignment becomes more important than outcome. This is where the influence of others begins to diminish further. Because when you are no longer announcing your intentions, you are also no longer exposing them to external interpretation. You are not receiving opinions on something that is still forming. You are not adjusting your direction based on incomplete feedback. You are not allowing doubt from others to enter before your own clarity has developed. And this preserves something essential: focus, undisturbed, unquestioned, directed inward. You begin to notice that the less you say about what you are doing, the more you are able to do it. Not because silence creates ability, but because it removes interference. You are no longer splitting your attention between execution and explanation. You are no longer shifting your energy between action and validation. You are moving in one direction, and that direction becomes more defined with each repetition. There is also a subtle increase in self-respect that emerges from this, not from achieving something large, but from honoring something small consistently. You begin to take your own commitments more seriously because you see the effect of following through. You see how it builds trust, not in the abstract sense, but in a tangible way. You trust that when you decide something, you will act on it, and that trust becomes foundational. It removes hesitation, it removes doubt, it removes the need to rely on external structure to maintain your behavior. You become your own structure. This is where the identity begins to solidify. Not through declaration, but through evidence. Not through description, but through repetition. You are not telling yourself who you are. You are showing yourself. And over time, that becomes undeniable. There is no longer a gap between intention and action. There is no longer a discrepancy between what you say and what you do. And because of that, your sense of self stabilizes. You are not shifting based on circumstance. You are consistent across it. This is what gives your actions weight, not volume, not visibility. Weight, because they are grounded in something that is not easily altered, something that has been built quietly, without interruption, without the need to be seen. And as this continues, you begin to understand something that cannot be learned through theory. Silence is not just a condition, it is a requirement for certain kinds of growth, the kinds that cannot survive exposure in their early stages, the kinds that require repetition without interference, the kinds that form identity rather than performance. And once you understand this, the way you move changes. You no longer feel the need to share every step. You no longer feel the need to explain every direction. You no longer feel the need to make your progress visible. You allow it to remain where it is most effective, within your actions, within your structure, within your discipline. And this changes how others perceive you, even if they cannot explain why. Because what they see is not what you say. It is what you consistently do, and consistency, when it is real, does not need introduction. It becomes evident, over time, without effort, without announcement, without explanation. And that is where your position begins to strengthen in a way that cannot be easily disrupted. Not because you are trying to appear disciplined, but because you have removed everything that interfered with it. As this pattern of quiet consistency continues, you begin to notice something that was previously abstract becoming more concrete. The connection between what you do repeatedly and who you become is no longer an idea. It is visible in your own behavior, not in dramatic changes, but in small, steady shifts that accumulate without announcement. You begin to see that identity is not something you declare once and carry forward unchanged. It is something that is reinforced daily through actions that either align with it or weaken it. This realization changes how you approach even the smallest decisions. You stop viewing them as isolated moments. You begin to see them as reinforcement. Each time you follow through, you strengthen a pattern. Each time you abandon it, you weaken it. And over time, those patterns define your direction more than any single goal ever could. This is where discipline becomes less about forcing yourself to act and more about maintaining continuity. You are no longer asking whether you feel like doing something. You are asking whether it is part of the structure you have chosen. And if it is, you proceed. Not with resistance, not with negotiation, but with a quiet acceptance that this is simply what you do now. There is a particular clarity that comes from this, the reduction of internal conflict. You are no longer debating with yourself at every step. You are no longer weighing options that have already been decided. You have removed the need for repeated justification, and in doing so, you free up something that was previously consumed by indecision: your attention, your energy, your capacity to remain focused. This is where self-respect begins to take a different form, not as a feeling, but as a result. You respect yourself not because you tell yourself you should, but because your actions provide evidence that you can rely on yourself. That when you commit to something, you follow through. That when you set a direction, you maintain it. And this reliability becomes the foundation of your confidence. It is not built on outcome, it is built on consistency. There is also a noticeable change in how you experience failure. Before, failure may have felt like a disruption, something that required immediate correction, something that carried weight beyond the moment itself. Now it is different. You see it as part of the process, not something to avoid entirely, but something to observe and adjust. You do not collapse your structure because of one deviation. You return to it. You continue. And in doing so, you prevent small setbacks from becoming larger disruptions. This is where resilience becomes practical, not in enduring extreme conditions, but in maintaining direction through ordinary inconsistency. You do not expect perfection. You expect continuation. And because of that, your progress becomes more stable, less dependent on circumstance, less vulnerable to interruption, more aligned with the long-term structure you have established. You also begin to notice how your relationship with effort changes. It becomes less emotional, less tied to motivation, more neutral. You do what is required because it is required, not because it feels significant in the moment, not because it provides immediate satisfaction, but because it aligns with what you have chosen to build. And this removes a layer of resistance that many people carry: the need to feel inspired before acting, the need to feel certain before committing, the need to feel motivated before continuing. You no longer wait for those conditions, you act without them. And in doing so, you reduce the variability in your behavior. Your actions become more predictable, more consistent, more aligned. This is where identity begins to stabilize in a way that does not fluctuate with external conditions. You are no longer adjusting who you are based on what is happening around you. You are maintaining who you are regardless of it. And this stability becomes visible not through what you say, but through how you move. There is less hesitation, less overcorrection, less reaction. You make decisions with a level of clarity that comes from repetition. You follow through without needing to reinforce your commitment each time. You remain consistent even when the environment changes. This is what gives your presence a different quality. Not because you are trying to project anything, but because you are no longer divided. Your actions, your decisions, your direction are aligned, and alignment reduces friction. Not external friction, but internal. You are no longer working against yourself. You are no longer undermining your own structure. You are moving in one direction, and that direction is reinforced daily. There is also a shift in how you perceive time. It becomes less about short-term results and more about long-term accumulation. You begin to understand that what you are building cannot be measured in single days or even single weeks. It is measured in patterns, in continuity, in the absence of deviation. And because of that, you become less concerned with immediate outcomes. You focus on maintaining the process, on preserving the structure, on continuing the pattern. This does not mean you ignore results. It means you do not depend on them to maintain your behavior. Your behavior remains consistent regardless. And over time, results follow. Not because you forced them, but because the structure produced them. This is where the difference between performance and identity becomes clear. Performance is temporary. It appears in moments. It is influenced by conditions. Identity is continuous. It is present across time. It is reinforced through repetition. And once identity is established, performance becomes a byproduct. You no longer need to push yourself to perform. You act in accordance with who you are, and that action produces results naturally. This is why the quiet work matters, the early mornings, the uninterrupted focus, the decisions made without external pressure, the actions taken without visibility. These are the moments where identity is formed, not in public, not in recognition, but in private consistency. And as this continues, you begin to see a separation between yourself and those who are still operating in a different pattern, not as a judgment, but as an observation. You see how often others are influenced by mood, by reaction, by external input, and you recognize that you were once operating in the same way. But now there is a difference. You are less reactive, less dependent, less influenced by what is not aligned with your direction. And because of that, your path becomes more defined. You are not shifting constantly. You are not adjusting based on temporary conditions. You are continuing. This is where the idea of self-mastery becomes practical, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. You are not controlling everything. You are controlling your actions, your responses, your direction, and that is enough, because that is what determines everything else. And once you understand this, your focus becomes sharper. You no longer try to manage what is outside of you. You direct what is within you, your attention, your behavior, your consistency. And in doing so, you create a foundation that is not easily disturbed, because it is not dependent on anything external. It is built from repetition, from alignment, from discipline that is applied daily, quietly, without interruption. And this is where your sense of identity becomes less fragile, less influenced by opinion, less dependent on outcome, more stable, more grounded, more consistent. You are no longer trying to become someone. You are reinforcing who you are, and that reinforcement continues day after day, without the need for recognition, without the need for confirmation, without the need to be seen, because what you are building is not for display. It is for structure. It is for stability. It is for strength that remains when everything else shifts. And that strength is not created in moments of intensity. It is created in moments of repetition. The ones that no one sees, the ones that no one acknowledges, the ones that define everything. As this rhythm settles into your life, it begins to reshape not just how you act, but how you exist within your own day. The hours no longer feel like something to get through or manage. They begin to feel like territory you occupy with intention. You are no longer moving from one task to another in reaction to what appears. You are moving according to structure. And that structure, once established, starts to influence even the smallest parts of your behavior. You notice it in the morning. The moment you wake up is no longer rushed or immediately consumed by external input. There is a pause, not long but deliberate. You do not reach outward first. You return inward. You remember what you are building. You recall your direction before anything else enters your mind. And this changes how the rest of the day unfolds, because the first decision sets the tone for everything that follows. If you begin with distraction, the day fragments. If you begin with clarity, the day aligns. And this is not symbolic, it is practical. The early moments of the day establish your position, whether you will lead your attention or follow whatever appears first. And once you begin leading consistently, the rest of your actions follow with less resistance. There is also a shift in how you approach your physical routine, not as an obligation, not as something separate from your mental discipline, but as an extension of it. You begin to understand that the body is not separate from the mind in its development. The way you move, the way you endure, the way you show up when it is uncomfortable, all of it reinforces the same pattern. You are training yourself to act without negotiation, to continue without needing immediate reward, to remain consistent regardless of how you feel in the moment. And this carries into everything else. Work becomes less about bursts of effort and more about sustained focus. You sit with what matters longer. You complete what you start more often. You are less inclined to interrupt yourself for something easier, and because of that, your output changes, not necessarily in volume, but in quality. You are no longer dividing your attention across multiple directions. You are concentrating it, and concentration produces depth that cannot be achieved through scattered effort. There is also a noticeable change in how you experience breaks. They are no longer escapes. They are intentional pauses. You step away not because you are overwhelmed, but because you have completed what you intended. You return to rest with the same discipline you bring to work. And this prevents the cycle of overextension followed by collapse that many people experience. Your pace becomes more even, more sustainable, less dependent on extremes. This is where balance begins to emerge, not as something you aim for, but as something that results from structure. You are no longer oscillating between effort and avoidance. You are maintaining continuity, and continuity creates stability. That stability begins to affect how you respond to external demands as well. You are less reactive to sudden requests, less influenced by urgency that is not aligned with your priorities. You begin to evaluate before committing. You consider whether something deserves your time before you give it. And because of that, your time becomes more protected, not in a rigid way, but in a deliberate one. You are no longer available to everything. You are available to what matters. This is where your boundaries become clearer, even if you do not express them directly. You do not need to explain why you are not engaging. You simply do not engage. And over time, others begin to recognize this, not because you told them, but because your behavior remains consistent. You are not easily redirected. You are not easily interrupted. You are not easily drawn into things that do not align with your direction. And this creates a different kind of presence, one that is not loud but is firm, not assertive in speech but clear in action. There is also a shift in how you handle idle moments. Time that was once filled automatically now becomes open, and instead of rushing to fill it, you allow it to remain. You sit with your thoughts without needing to escape them. You observe without immediately acting, and in that space your mind begins to organize itself more effectively. You see connections more clearly. You process decisions more thoroughly. You reduce the noise that once clouded your judgment. This is where clarity deepens, not through effort, but through absence of interference. And as this clarity becomes more consistent, your decisions begin to carry more weight. You are less likely to change direction impulsively, less likely to second-guess without reason, less likely to abandon something that is still aligned simply because it is difficult. You trust your process, not because it is easy, but because it is consistent. This trust reinforces everything else. It allows you to move forward without constant evaluation, without needing to check whether you're on the right path at every step. You know your direction, and that knowledge reduces hesitation. There is also a noticeable change in how you experience solitude. It is no longer something to avoid. It becomes necessary, not in excess, but in proportion. You recognize that without it, your clarity begins to diminish, your attention begins to scatter, your structure begins to weaken, so you return to it. Not as isolation, but as maintenance. You use silence to recalibrate, to realign, to ensure that your actions remain consistent with your standards. And this regular return prevents drift. It keeps your direction intact, even when the environment becomes more demanding, even when there are more opportunities to deviate. You remain anchored, because you have established a rhythm that does not depend on what is happening around you. This rhythm becomes your advantage, not because it is visible, but because it is reliable. You can depend on it, day after day, without needing to recreate it, without needing to force it. It is there, supporting your actions, guiding your decisions, maintaining your position. And as this continues, something becomes increasingly clear. You are no longer building discipline, you are living within it. It is no longer something you apply, it is something you operate from. And that changes everything, because now your behavior is not an effort to improve. It is an expression of what has already been established. You are not trying to focus, you are focused. You are not trying to be consistent, you are consistent. You are not trying to control your actions, you are directing them. And this direction holds, even when the day is unpredictable, even when things do not go as planned, even when there are moments of disruption. You return to your structure, you continue, without needing to adjust who you are. And this continuity is what allows the next stage to unfold. Because once your external actions are aligned, the next challenge is not what you do. It is how you remain when the pressure becomes more personal, when the test is not your routine, but your response to others. As your structure becomes steady, the nature of the challenge begins to change. It is no longer found in managing your routine or maintaining your focus in isolation. It begins to appear in your interactions, in the presence of others, in moments where your discipline is no longer tested by silence alone, but by friction. This is where many people lose what they have built, not because their habits were weak, but because their emotional position was never fully examined. You begin to notice how quickly a single interaction can disturb an otherwise stable day. A remark that feels dismissive, a tone that suggests disrespect, an absence of acknowledgement where you expected it. These moments do not arrive as major events, but they carry a weight that can shift your internal state if left unchecked. And the instinct is immediate: to respond, to correct, to reassert your position, to make it clear that you will not be overlooked or misunderstood. But in that instinct, there is a risk. You may win the moment, but lose your position. Because the moment you allow someone else's behavior to dictate your response, you are no longer acting from your structure. You are reacting from theirs. And this is where emotional control becomes more than a concept. It becomes a decision that must be made in real time, often without preparation. You start to see that not every form of disrespect requires a response. Not because it is acceptable, but because responding to it does not always serve you. There is a difference between recognizing something and engaging with it. You can see clearly what is happening without stepping into it. And this ability to observe without immediate reaction becomes one of the most defining aspects of your discipline. You begin to understand that your composure is not fragile. It does not need to be defended in every moment. It is not threatened by every external action. It remains intact unless you choose to abandon it. This is a difficult shift because it goes against a deeply ingrained habit. The habit of equating response with strength, of believing that silence in the face of friction is weakness. But as your understanding deepens, that belief begins to dissolve. You see that strength is not in how quickly you respond. It is in whether your response is necessary at all. There are moments where silence carries more authority than any explanation. Moments where not engaging communicates more clearly than engaging. Moments where maintaining your position without reaction demonstrates a level of control that cannot be mistaken. And this does not mean you avoid all confrontation. It means you choose it deliberately. You do not enter conflict out of impulse. You enter it when it aligns with your standards, when it serves a purpose beyond immediate emotion, when it is necessary, not just available. This distinction becomes critical because it preserves your energy. It prevents you from being drawn into situations that do not contribute to your direction. It allows you to remain focused even when others are attempting to redirect you. There is also a shift in how you interpret the behavior of others. Before, their actions may have felt personal, a reflection of you, a challenge to your position. Now you begin to see them differently, as expressions of their own patterns, their own habits, their own level of control or lack of it. And this separation creates space. You are no longer absorbing everything that comes toward you. You are observing it, evaluating it, deciding what, if anything, it means in relation to you. And often the answer is less than you initially believed. This reduces unnecessary engagement. You do not carry conversations longer than they need to be. You do not revisit interactions that do not require further thought. You do not assign significance to things that do not align with your standards. And this keeps your internal state more stable, less influenced, less reactive, more consistent. There will still be moments where the pressure increases, where the situation feels more direct, where silence is more difficult to maintain. These are the moments where your discipline is most visible to yourself, not to others, to yourself. Because in those moments you know what you are capable of, you know what you could say, you know how you could respond, and you choose not to, not out of hesitation, but out of clarity. You recognize that the outcome of that response would not improve your position. It would only satisfy a temporary impulse. And you have already learned that impulses are not reliable guides. So you remain. You hold your ground internally. You allow the moment to pass without adding to it. And in doing so, you preserve something that would have been lost otherwise: your alignment. This is where emotional control becomes integrated into your identity, not as a restriction, but as a form of freedom. You are no longer compelled to respond. You are no longer pulled into every interaction. You are no longer dependent on resolving every tension immediately. You can allow things to remain unresolved without losing your position. And this creates a different kind of confidence, one that is not tied to winning exchanges, but to maintaining consistency. There is also a shift in how others begin to perceive you, not necessarily in a conscious way, but in how they interact with you over time. They begin to recognize that you are not easily influenced, that you do not respond in predictable ways, that your behavior is not reactive. And because of that, the nature of their engagement changes. Some may withdraw, some may adjust, some may test further. But regardless of their response, your position remains the same. And this consistency establishes something that does not need to be stated. It becomes understood, not through explanation, but through repetition. This is where your presence begins to carry weight, not through force, but through stability. You are not trying to assert yourself, you are simply not moving. And that lack of movement in response to external pressure creates a kind of gravity. Others feel it, even if they cannot define it, because it contrasts with the usual pattern of reaction they are accustomed to. This is what allows you to move through situations without losing direction, without being pulled into unnecessary conflict, without being distracted from what you have chosen to build. You are not avoiding life, you are navigating it with control. And this control is not about dominating situations, it is about maintaining yourself within them. There is a difference. And once you understand that difference, your approach changes permanently. You no longer seek to manage everything around you, you focus on what is within your reach, your response, your attention, your consistency. And this focus simplifies everything. It removes the complexity that comes from trying to influence variables that are not yours. It allows you to operate from a place that is stable, regardless of what is happening externally. And as this continues, your interactions become less draining, because you are no longer investing energy into every situation. You are selecting where to engage and where to remain. This selectivity preserves your clarity. It protects your focus. It ensures that your energy is directed toward what matters. And this becomes increasingly important as your path becomes more defined. Because the more you build, the more there is to protect, not from others, but from misdirection, from unnecessary engagement, from the subtle pull to return to old patterns. You begin to see that discipline is not just about what you do alone. It is about how you remain when you are not alone, how you hold your position when others attempt to shift it, how you continue your direction without being influenced by what does not align. And this is where your practice deepens, not in isolation, but in presence, among others, without losing yourself. And once this becomes consistent, the next shift begins to take shape, because you are no longer reacting. You are no longer explaining. You are no longer adjusting your behavior to meet external expectations. You are becoming something more stable, more grounded, more difficult to move. And that stability begins to change not just how you act, but who you are becoming. As this steadiness becomes more consistent, something subtle but significant begins to change in how you experience your own thoughts. The space between what happens and how you respond begins to widen. It is not dramatic, but it is reliable. Where there was once immediacy, there is now a pause. And within that pause, there is clarity that was previously unavailable. You begin to notice how quickly the mind forms judgments. Not always accurate, not always useful, but immediate. An assumption about someone's intention, a conclusion about what something means, a reaction that feels justified before it has been examined. These patterns do not disappear, but they become visible. And once they are visible, they can be questioned. This is where observation becomes more refined. You are no longer only observing what is happening around you. You are observing how your mind is interpreting it, and this changes everything. Because once you see that your initial reaction is not always aligned with reason, you stop treating it as authority. You allow it to exist, but you do not act on it immediately. You examine it. You ask whether it is accurate, whether it is necessary, whether it serves your direction or disrupts it. And often the answer leads you to remain still. This is not hesitation, it is discipline. The discipline to delay action until judgment is clear, and this delay becomes one of your most effective tools, not because it removes difficulty, but because it prevents unnecessary escalation. You begin to see how many situations are amplified by immediate reaction, a misunderstanding that becomes conflict, a minor issue that becomes prolonged, a moment of tension that expands because neither side paused long enough to assess it properly. And by not participating in that pattern, you reduce the frequency of unnecessary disruption in your own life. You are not solving every problem. You are preventing many of them from forming. This is a quieter form of control, but it is more stable. It does not rely on correcting outcomes. It relies on preventing misalignment at the point of response. There is also a shift in how you relate to discomfort. Not the physical kind, but the mental and emotional kind. The discomfort of being misunderstood, the discomfort of not responding, the discomfort of holding a position that is not immediately validated. Before, these may have felt like signals that something needed to be corrected quickly. Now they are different. You recognize them as part of the process. Not something to remove, but something to move through. You allow them to exist without altering your direction. And this builds a different kind of strength. One that is not dependent on comfort. One that is not destabilized by temporary unease. You begin to understand that discomfort does not always indicate a problem. Sometimes it indicates growth. Sometimes it indicates that you are no longer operating in familiar patterns, and that unfamiliarity can feel unstable at first, but if you remain consistent, it stabilizes. There is also a noticeable change in how you process your own internal dialogue. The constant stream of thoughts that once felt automatic now becomes something you can step back from. You begin to recognize that not every thought is a directive. Not every idea needs to be followed. Not every concern needs to be acted on. And this reduces a significant amount of internal noise. You are no longer reacting to your own mind in the same way. You are observing it, filtering it, deciding what is relevant and what is not. This creates a level of mental clarity that was previously difficult to maintain. Because you are no longer engaged in every internal conversation, you are selecting which ones deserve your attention. And this selection process mirrors what you have already developed externally. The same discipline you apply to your environment, you now apply to your thoughts. You allow what is aligned. You discard what is not, without resistance, without attachment, without the need to resolve everything immediately. This is where your sense of control deepens further, not over events, not over others, but over the direction of your own mind. And this control is not rigid, it is flexible. It allows for observation without forcing immediate conclusion. It allows for uncertainty without creating instability. It allows for complexity without losing clarity. And this flexibility makes your position stronger. Because you are not reacting to every shift, you are adjusting with awareness. There will still be moments where the pull to react returns, where the pause feels shorter, where the impulse feels stronger. And in those moments your practice is tested again, not as a failure, but as reinforcement. Each time you recognize the pattern and choose differently, you strengthen it. Each time you return to observation instead of reaction, you reinforce your control. And over time, these moments become less disruptive, not because they disappear, but because your response to them becomes consistent. This consistency begins to affect how you move through more complex situations as well. Situations where there is ambiguity, where there is no clear answer, where there is no immediate resolution. You become more comfortable remaining in that space. You do not rush to conclusion. You do not force clarity where it has not yet formed. You allow the situation to develop while maintaining your position, and this patience prevents unnecessary error. You are less likely to act prematurely, less likely to commit to something that has not been fully considered, less likely to be influenced by incomplete information. This is where judgment becomes more reliable. Not because you are always correct, but because you are consistent in how you arrive at your conclusions. You are not reacting, you are assessing. And assessment creates stability, even in uncertainty. There is also a change in how you relate to your own progress. You are no longer looking for dramatic shifts. You are observing subtle improvements, a slightly longer pause, a slightly clearer decision, a slightly more consistent action. And these small shifts accumulate. They build a foundation that is not easily disrupted, because it is not dependent on one moment. It is built across many. You begin to understand that transformation is not a single event. It is a pattern of behavior, a pattern of thought, a pattern of response. And once that pattern is established, it defines everything that follows. You are no longer trying to become disciplined. You are acting in a disciplined way consistently. You are no longer trying to control your reactions. You are choosing your responses deliberately. You are no longer trying to maintain clarity. You are operating from it. And this changes how you experience your own mind. It becomes less crowded, less reactive, more stable, more focused, more aligned. You are no longer being pulled in multiple directions internally. You are moving in one, and that direction is consistent with everything you have been building. Quietly, without interruption, without the need to be seen. This is where your inner state begins to reflect your outer structure. There is alignment between what you do and how you think, between how you respond and what you value, between your actions and your standards. And this alignment creates a level of coherence that is difficult to disturb, because it is not dependent on external conditions. It is built internally, and once it is built, it supports everything else. Your decisions, your actions, your direction. All of it rests on this foundation, and as this foundation strengthens, the next stage becomes possible. Not just maintaining control, but redefining what matters entirely. As your inner state becomes more ordered, your attention less scattered, and your responses more deliberate, a deeper shift begins to take place. It is no longer about doing more or refining what already exists. It becomes a question of direction itself. Because once you gain control over your actions, a new responsibility emerges to make sure that what you are consistently building is actually worth the discipline you are giving to it. You begin to notice that many of your previous goals were not entirely your own. They were absorbed over time through expectation, comparison, and repetition. What once felt important now feels slightly distant, not wrong, but no longer aligned. And this realization does not arrive loudly. It appears quietly in moments where you pause long enough to question why you are moving in a certain direction at all. This is where many people return to distraction, because reconsidering direction requires more effort than continuing blindly. It is easier to keep moving than to stop and evaluate, but you no longer operate that way. You do not move simply because movement is available. You move because it is aligned. And when something no longer aligns, you do not force yourself to continue out of habit. Instead, you observe it carefully. You allow the discomfort of uncertainty without rushing to resolve it. You examine whether what you are pursuing still reflects your standards. And in doing so, you begin to detach not from effort, but from outcomes that once defined your sense of progress. You stop chasing what no longer fits, even if it once seemed necessary. This detachment creates space that was previously filled with expectation, pressure, and the need to prove something. And once that space is clear, your focus becomes more precise. You are no longer trying to reach everything. You are selecting what matters. You are choosing what deserves your time and discipline based on alignment, not appearance. This is where self-respect becomes more defined, not in what you say about yourself, but in what you allow yourself to pursue. You begin to withdraw your effort from things that do not meet your standards, not because they are inherently wrong, but because they are no longer right for you. And this selectivity strengthens everything else you are building. Your discipline becomes more effective because it is no longer scattered. It is directed towards something that is consistent with who you are becoming. And as a result, your progress becomes more stable. Not because it is faster, but because it is aligned. You are no longer dividing your effort across conflicting directions. There is also a shift in how you evaluate progress. You no longer rely solely on external markers or visible results. You begin to assess whether your actions reflect your principles, whether your time is being used in a way that is consistent with your direction. And this internal measure becomes more reliable than anything external. This reduces a significant amount of pressure. You are no longer trying to meet expectations that were never fully yours. You are no longer adjusting your path to maintain an image. You are operating from a place that is internally defined. And because of that, your movement becomes more certain even when the outcome is not fully visible. There will still be moments of doubt, but they are different now. You do not react to them immediately. You examine them. You allow them to reveal whether something needs to be adjusted or simply observed. And this prevents you from abandoning your structure due to temporary uncertainty. Over time, your path becomes more refined. Not through constant change, but through deliberate adjustment. You remove what no longer aligns and reinforce what does. You are no longer reacting to what is available. You are selecting what is meaningful. And this selection creates a direction that is both stable and precise. This is where focusing on yourself becomes fully realized, not as withdrawal, but as clarity. You are no longer distracted by everything that could be done. You are grounded in what should be done. And that grounding simplifies everything. It allows you to move forward without needing constant confirmation. And as this continues, your discipline becomes more than maintenance. It becomes an expression of what you value, an expression of your standards, your direction, and your consistency. And once that expression is stable, the next question begins to take shape, not about what you are building, but about whether you can continue without needing anything in return. As your direction becomes clearer and your discipline more stable, a different kind of tension begins to emerge. It is no longer about distraction or inconsistency. It is about expectation. The quiet, often unnoticed expectation that your effort should lead to recognition, that your consistency should produce visible results, that your discipline should eventually be acknowledged in some form. And if you are not careful, this expectation begins to attach itself to your actions. At first it feels reasonable. You are doing the work, maintaining structure, staying aligned. It seems natural to expect something in return. Progress, acknowledgement, movement. But this is where your position can begin to weaken again. Because the moment your effort becomes tied to outcome, your consistency becomes conditional. You start to measure your discipline based on what it produces, not on whether it remains intact. You begin to notice this in subtle ways. A moment of hesitation when results are not immediate. A slight shift in motivation when no one notices your effort. A quiet frustration when progress feels slower than expected. None of these reactions are extreme, but they indicate something important, that your discipline is beginning to look outward again for validation. This is where a deeper level of detachment becomes necessary. Not detachment from effort, but from the need for return. You begin to understand that your actions must stand on their own, independent of what they produce in the short term. Because if they do not, they will fluctuate with every delay, every setback, every lack of recognition. You shift your focus back to what is within your control, your actions, your consistency, your alignment. You remind yourself that the value of discipline is not in what it brings immediately, but in what it builds over time. And that process does not always provide visible confirmation in the moment. This does not mean you ignore outcomes entirely. It means you do not depend on them to maintain your direction. You continue because it is aligned, not because it is rewarded. And this removes a layer of instability that many people never fully recognize. The constant adjustment of effort based on perceived return. There is a noticeable difference once you begin to operate this way. Your consistency becomes less fragile. It is no longer influenced by external response. It does not rise when things go well and fall when they do not. It remains steady because it is rooted in something internal, something you have already examined and chosen. This is where patience takes on a different meaning. It is not waiting for results. It is continuing without needing them immediately. It is maintaining your structure even when there is no visible indication that it is working. And in doing so, you begin to build a level of resilience that is not dependent on confirmation. You also begin to see how often people abandon their direction too early, not because their path was wrong, but because their expectation of return was too immediate. They interpret delay as failure silence, as absence of progress, and they adjust before anything has had time to develop fully. But you no longer move in that way. You allow time to do its work. You maintain your position without forcing outcomes. You trust the process not because it guarantees a result, but because it aligns with your standards, and that alignment is enough to continue. There is also a quiet shift in how you experience success. It becomes less about external achievement and more about internal consistency. You begin to recognize that maintaining your structure, honoring your commitments, and acting according to your principles is already a form of success. Not in a visible sense, but in a foundational one. This changes how you respond to both progress and delay. You do not become overly attached to either. You remain steady, because your direction is not dependent on either one. It is built on something that remains regardless of outcome. And this steadiness creates a different kind of freedom. You are no longer pressured by the need to achieve something quickly. You are no longer influenced by how others measure progress. You are operating within your own structure, your own standards, your own timeline. This is where your discipline becomes fully self-sustaining. It no longer needs reinforcement from outside. It is maintained by repetition, by alignment, by the evidence of your own actions over time. And because of that, it becomes more stable than anything external could provide. You begin to move with less urgency, but more precision, less pressure, but more consistency. You are not rushing to arrive somewhere. You are building something that holds, and that shift changes everything about how you experience your path. Because now your effort is no longer a means to an end. It is part of the structure itself. It is how you live, how you act, how you maintain your position, and that makes it less vulnerable to change. As this continues, the final layer begins to reveal itself. Not about what you do or how you do it, but about who you are without the need for anything beyond it. Because once you remove expectation, what remains is something far more stable, something that does not depend on outcome, recognition, or validation. And that is where the transformation becomes complete. At this point, something settles that cannot be forced and cannot be imitated. It is not a new technique or a sharper discipline, but a quiet shift in how you exist within yourself. You are no longer trying to become someone. You are no longer chasing a version of yourself that exists somewhere ahead. You are operating from what has already been built through repetition, through restraint, through consistency that no one else needed to see. This removes a kind of internal pressure that once followed you. The pressure to prove, to demonstrate, to confirm that you are moving in the right direction. You no longer need that confirmation in the same way, because your actions have already provided it, not once, but repeatedly. And that repetition has replaced doubt with something more stable, a grounded sense of self that does not shift with circumstance. You begin to notice how this affects your presence. You speak less, but when you do, it carries more weight. You move without drawing attention, yet your direction is clear. You are no longer trying to be perceived a certain way, and because of that, your behavior becomes more natural, more direct, more aligned with what you have already established internally. There is also a shift in how you experience external noise. It does not disappear, but it loses its influence. Opinions, reactions, distractions, they continue to exist, but they no longer enter your process in the same way. You see them, but you do not absorb them. You hear them, but you do not follow them. And this creates a kind of separation that protects your clarity. This separation is not distance from the world, but control within it. You are still present, still engaged when necessary, but you are no longer influenced by everything that appears. You choose what to engage with. You choose what to ignore. And this choice becomes automatic, not through habit, but through understanding. There is also a deeper sense of calm that begins to form. Not because everything is easy, but because you are no longer resisting what is outside your control. You have stopped trying to manage every outcome, stopped trying to influence every perception. You have narrowed your focus to what is yours, and in doing so, you have reduced unnecessary tension. This calm is not passive, it is structured. It comes from knowing what matters and what does not, from directing your attention accordingly, from maintaining your position regardless of external movement. And because of that, it remains stable even when circumstances change. You begin to see that much of what once felt urgent was never essential. The need to respond quickly, to prove a point, to be understood immediately, all of it begins to fade. Not because it disappears, but because it no longer holds the same importance. You are no longer driven by the need to resolve everything in the moment. Instead, you allow things to unfold. You allow time to reveal what is necessary. You allow your actions to speak without needing to explain them. And this patience creates a different kind of strength, one that is not reactive, but enduring. There is also a shift in how you relate to your own progress. You are no longer tracking it constantly. You are no longer measuring every step. You are simply continuing. And in that continuation, progress happens without needing to be observed at every stage. This removes the tendency to overanalyze, to question whether you are doing enough, whether you are moving fast enough, whether you are on the right path. Those questions lose their urgency because your structure answers them through action. You are no longer trying to convince yourself of anything. You are showing yourself daily through what you do. And that consistency replaces uncertainty with something more reliable than belief. It replaces it with evidence. There is also a quiet confidence that emerges from this, not the kind that seeks recognition, but the kind that does not need it. You know what you are doing. You know why you are doing it. And that clarity removes the need to justify it to others. This is where your independence becomes complete, not in isolation, but in self-direction. You are no longer waiting for permission, no longer seeking validation, no longer adjusting your path based on external response. You are moving according to what you have already established as true. And because of that, your path becomes more stable, not because it is easier, but because it is consistent. You are no longer pulled in different directions. You are not reacting to every change. You are continuing regardless of what appears around you. This is where the idea of focusing on yourself reaches its full meaning. It is no longer a strategy. It is your default state. Your attention remains where it is most effective. Your actions reflect your standards. Your direction is maintained without constant effort. And in that state, there is nothing left to prove. No need to demonstrate your discipline. No need to show your progress. No need to explain your choices. Because everything that matters is already contained within what you do consistently, without interruption. And as this becomes your way of moving, the final stage approaches. Not a new level of effort, but a deeper level of understanding. One that is not about building or maintaining, but about sustaining this position without losing it, regardless of what changes around you. At this stage, the challenge is no longer about building discipline or refining your direction. It is about sustaining it without slipping back into old patterns when conditions change. Because no matter how stable your structure becomes, life will still introduce moments that test it. Not through obvious disruption, but through subtle shifts that invite you to relax your standards without noticing. You may find yourself in periods where things begin to go well. Progress becomes visible. Your efforts start to produce results. And with that, there is a quiet temptation to loosen the structure that created it, to allow small exceptions, to reduce the intensity of your attention, to assume that what has been built will now sustain itself without the same level of discipline. This is where many people lose their position, not during difficulty, but during comfort, because comfort reduces awareness. It creates the illusion that consistency is no longer required, that the structure can now operate on its own. But what you have built does not maintain itself. It is sustained through the same repetition that created it. And once that repetition weakens, so does everything built upon it. You begin to recognize this pattern early. You notice the subtle shift in your behavior, a delay where there was once immediacy, a distraction that you once would have ignored, a small break in your routine that feels insignificant but carries weight. And instead of allowing it to expand, you correct it quickly. Not with force, but with clarity. You return to your structure without negotiation. This is where maintenance becomes discipline. Not the creation of new habits, but the preservation of existing ones. You are no longer building from nothing. You are protecting what has already been established. And that requires the same level of attention, if not more. Because it is easier to build something new with intensity than to maintain something over time with consistency. There is also a different kind of fatigue that can appear here. Not physical, but mental. The sense that you have already proven your discipline, that you have already done the work, and that continuing at the same level is unnecessary. But this is another form of distraction, a quieter one. Because it presents itself as reason rather than impulse. You begin to understand that discipline is not something you complete, it is something you continue. There is no point where it becomes permanent without effort. There is only a point where it becomes integrated into how you operate. And that integration must be maintained, not through intensity, but through consistency. This is where your approach becomes more sustainable. You no longer rely on extremes. You do not push beyond your limits only to fall back. You maintain a steady pace, one that allows you to continue without interruption, one that does not require recovery from overextension. And this steadiness becomes your advantage, because while others fluctuate between effort and inactivity, you remain consistent. You continue at a level that does not collapse under pressure. You maintain your position even when there is no urgency pushing you forward. This is where discipline becomes independent of circumstance. It does not increase when things are difficult or decrease when things are easy. It remains. And that consistency creates a form of reliability that is rare, not just in how you act, but in how you think. You are no longer adjusting your standards based on your environment. You are maintaining them regardless of it. There is also a deeper level of awareness that develops here. You begin to recognize that the greatest risk is not failure, but drift. A slow movement away from your structure that happens without clear intention. A gradual shift in behavior that is not immediately noticeable but accumulates over time. And because it is gradual, it is often ignored until it has already created distance. But you no longer allow that. You observe your patterns closely. You notice small deviations, and you correct them before they expand. This is where discipline becomes precise, not broad, not reactive, but attentive. You are not waiting for something to go wrong. You are maintaining what is right, and this level of attention keeps your structure intact, even when there are no external pressures forcing you to maintain it. There is also a shift in how you relate to motivation at this stage. It becomes almost irrelevant. You are not relying on it. You are not waiting for it. You act regardless of whether it is present, because your actions are no longer driven by how you feel. They are driven by what you have already decided. And this removes a significant amount of variability from your behavior. You are no longer inconsistent. You are no longer dependent on internal states that fluctuate. You are stable, and that stability is what allows you to sustain your direction over time. This is where your discipline becomes quiet. Not something you think about constantly, not something you need to reinforce with reminders. It becomes part of how you operate. It is present without needing attention. It supports your actions without requiring focus. And because of that, it becomes more durable, more resistant to disruption, more capable of lasting. There is also a final layer of detachment that forms here, not from effort, not from direction, but from the idea that anything external can define your progress. You are no longer influenced by how things appear. You are not measuring yourself against others. You are not adjusting your path based on comparison. You are moving within your own structure, and that structure remains consistent regardless of what is happening outside of it. This is what allows you to sustain your position, not for a short period, but over time. Not with intensity, but with continuity. You are no longer building something that depends on momentum. You are maintaining something that depends on consistency. And that consistency becomes your foundation. It supports everything else, your decisions, your actions, your direction. All of it rests on this ability to continue without interruption. And once this is established, there is nothing left to add. Only something to carry forward, something that does not need to be changed, only maintained. And that is where the final realization begins to take shape. At the final stage, what remains is not a new method, not a stronger push, not a higher level of intensity. What remains is simplicity, a return to what has been built, stripped of everything unnecessary. You are no longer searching for better techniques or faster ways forward. You are maintaining what works, continuing what is aligned, and removing anything that interrupts that clarity. You begin to see that everything you needed was never complicated. It was never hidden. It was always in the way you direct your attention, the way you act, when no one is watching, the way you hold your position when something tries to move you. And once these are stable, there is nothing left to chase. There is only something to live. This is where the idea of focus changes its meaning. It is no longer something you apply when needed. It becomes how you operate. Your attention stays where it should. Your actions follow your structure. Your decisions are made without unnecessary delay. And because of that, your life begins to move with a kind of quiet precision. There is no urgency in it, no pressure to prove anything, no need to accelerate. Because you are no longer trying to arrive somewhere else. You are already within the process that builds what matters. And that process does not require intensity. It requires continuity. You begin to understand that strength is not something you display. It is something you carry. It is present in how you respond, in how you remain, in how you continue without being influenced by what does not belong to your direction. And because it is carried, not shown, it cannot be taken from you. There is also a sense of stillness that becomes more consistent. Not the absence of movement, but the absence of unnecessary movement. You act when it is required. You remain when it is not. You do not fill space out of habit. You do not respond out of impulse. And in that restraint, your actions become more deliberate, more effective, more aligned. You are no longer pulled into every moment. You are selecting your movement, and that selection creates clarity. Because everything you do now has a reason, a direction, a place within the structure you have built. There is nothing random, nothing scattered, nothing wasted. You begin to see that the world around you has not changed. The noise is still there. The distractions still exist. The pressure to react has not disappeared, but your relationship to it has changed. You are no longer part of that movement. You are observing it without being drawn into it. You are present, but not influenced. You are aware, but not reactive. And this separation allows you to remain consistent regardless of what is happening externally. This is where your independence is complete, not in isolation, but in self-command. You are directing yourself, not waiting to be directed. You are deciding what matters, not reacting to what appears. And because of that, your path is no longer uncertain. It is defined by your actions, not by your circumstances. There is also a quiet confidence that no longer needs to be reinforced. It does not come from success or recognition. It comes from knowing that you can rely on yourself, that your actions will remain consistent, that your direction will hold, that your standards will not shift under pressure. And this reliability removes doubt. Not completely, but enough that it no longer controls your movement. You continue even when there is uncertainty. You act even when there is no immediate reward. You remain even when it would be easier to move. And this consistency becomes your identity, not something you describe, something you demonstrate every day through repetition, through alignment, through discipline that no longer requires effort to maintain. This is where the process becomes complete. Not because there is nothing left to improve, but because the foundation is stable. Everything you build from here will rest on it. Everything you do will reflect it. And because of that, you no longer need to search for strength. You are operating from it. You no longer need to find clarity. You are thinking with it. You no longer need to create discipline. You are living within it. And that changes the way you move forward. There is no longer a gap between who you are and what you do. There is no longer a distance between intention and action. There is no longer a need to prove anything to yourself or to anyone else. There is only continuation, quiet, consistent, uninterrupted. You focus on yourself, not as a strategy, but as a way of living. And in that focus, everything unnecessary falls away. What remains is simple, clear, stable, and enough. Because in the end, the strength you were looking for was never outside of you. It was built in the moments no one saw. It was shaped in the silence you chose to remain in. And it remains now not as something you reached, but as something you became. There is a kind of presence that does not ask to be seen. It forms quietly through repetition, through restraint, through decisions made when no one is there to witness them. And over time, it becomes something you carry without effort. not because it is easy, but because it is yours. You begin to understand that nothing essential needs to be announced. What you build in silence does not depend on recognition. It depends on consistency, on the ability to remain when it would be easier to react, on the discipline to continue when there is nothing to confirm that you are moving forward. If this reflection stayed with you, leave a quiet note below. Something simple like "stay steady." And if you choose to return here again, do it not for motivation, but for clarity. Because in the end, what you hold within your control is enough.